Okay, welcome. This is our first flipped classroom session. And today we're going to talk a little bit about attention when the goal is attention. And just a quick refresher, remember all behavior is chosen. It's designed to get something or avoid something. That something is what we use our reflections, our targeted reflections to try to determine. Because if a child's trying to get something or avoid something, and they're selecting this particular behavior because it has been reinforced and they're allowed to obtain that, then it's clear that all we need to do is find what is it they're trying to get or avoid, and then find a replacement behavior that assists them with that and work with them on choosing that replacement behavior. And then we'll see the target behavior decrease. Now, lots of teachers react to behavior when they see it. Um, doesn't usually work, and if it does, it's temporary. So what we're doing here is reflecting on behavior, um, targeted reflection. What is the goal of that misbehavior? If all behavior is indeed chosen, it's designed to get something or avoid something. What is that something? What is it that they're trying to get, or what is the function of that behavior, or the goal of that behavior? We talked a little bit and said that there were four goals of misbehavior, and that is attention, power, revenge, and avoidance of failure. And today, what we're going to work on is when the goal is indeed attention. Attention is probably the most common goal. It also, I don't know, it drives us a little nuts in class. We get tired of dealing with it. But the good news is that it's easily modified as long as we are indeed choosing the right strategy and that we've correctly identified that it is attention. So let's get started. Okay. When we say targeted reflections, what we're talking about is, you know, what exactly are the steps? What are the things that we do that can kind of determine and help us to determine whether that behavior is indeed, in this case, attention? Because a child clearly can talk to their neighbor, and the goal of that misbehavior is to gain attention. But sometimes it also, the exact same behavior can be done, and the goal is to invoke power or revenge or to avoid failure. It's the exact same behavior, but it has, for different students, it has different functions. Even the exact same behavior in the same student could have different functions, so it's important that our reflections are targeted. And so we've listed this out, and so the first thing that we're going to do is clearly and objectively define what is that student's behavior. What is their behavior? And a lot of times we're like, well, I see it, it's pretty clear, but you want to put it out in observable, measurable terms. You know, the child is disrespectful. Well, that's kind of hard to measure, and that's hard to observe, seeing how what is disrespectful to you could very well be respectful to me, or at least I don't have the same intensity. So we want to act as a movie camera. What does the movie camera? The child is doing this, the child is doing that. It has to be very clear and very specific. So, what is that student's behavior? That student is talking without permission to their neighbor. The student is yelling out answers without being called on. The student is pushing and shoving. Okay, so it's something that I can see very clearly. Okay, and then we want to go to our gauge. You know, we want to examine our gauge in step two, and the gauge is going to be our barometer. And our barometer has three indicators, and that can register mild, hot, or boiling. And what we want to do is we want to take stock into how we're feeling at that particular point. We're seeing that behavior. It's mildly irritating. I mean, I'm not totally angry, um, but we want to register. Am I mildly irritated? Am I hot? Am I boiling? You know, what is my gut instinct? And then once we've got that, we take a look at what is our impulse. What is it that we want to do? When we see that behavior, do we want to remind them? Do we want to nag them? Do we want to scold them? Do we want to come to the rescue? What is it that we want to do instinctively? Not that we're going to do it, but what is it that we want to do? Step four now is going to talk about, what happens when we do attune to that behavior, when we give that student some attention. Generally, it stops, although temporarily. And if those three things are occurring, we're mildly irritated, we want to remind, nag, scold, or come to the rescue. And if we do give some attention, then that behavior stops temporarily, then we know that the goal is attention. The actions are look at me, the gauge says I'm mildly irritated, the impulse, the outcome, and then the goal. And then we're fairly comfortable that the behavior is indeed, the goal of the behavior is indeed attention, or the function of that behavior is attention. Now, once we have that and we know what the function of that behavior is or the goal of that behavior is, then we can start choosing from the techniques and the strategies that are aligned to address attention seeking behaviors. We don't want to mix those two. We don't want to use an attention seeking strategy if the goal is power. Clearly, that could escalate it. Same thing if it was revenge or avoidance of failure. So we have to be fairly typical, and that's why finding the function or the goal of the misbehavior is really pretty important. Without that, we run the risk of, like I said, escalating and maybe even creating a power struggle or getting in situations that really didn't need to get in. So here's some things that we can do to minimize the attention. Just basically refuse to respond. We talked about that. We don't do it for a long time because, kids, we don't want kids to perceive that we're rejecting them. But clearly, if a child is shouting out an answer and he knows the rule because you taught it explicitly, then they are getting their needs of getting their attention needs met trump the rules. And they wouldn't do it if somebody didn't reinforce it. So shouting out their target behavior did indeed get reinforced because their attention needs were met. Yeah, they might get in a little bit of trouble, but that's just the cost of doing business. So if we refuse to respond, we're not reinforcing their behavior. The power of refusing to a particular behavior makes a lot of sense with regards to, well, we're not going to reinforce that target behavior. We're going to reinforce the replacement behavior, which is raise your hand and wait to be called on. So it also keeps us, not sure what happened here, but it also keeps us from reacting to behavior. We kind of do it, and there's a couple litmus tests. If he's inconvenienced or she's inconvenienced, but no one else really is, go for it. Just do it. See what happens. That's part of your mini bit. Remember, when you have determined that the goal of the misbehavior is attention, you want to come up with 3 or 4, this mini bit, 3 or 4 of these techniques, these strategies, and say, okay, first I'm going to refuse to respond, then I'm going to name drop, then I'm going to use teacher proximity, then I'm whatever order, however you want to address it. That's fine, but get in your head, here's my intervention plan, and I'll wait 2 minutes and not respond. If that doesn't work, then I'll go on to the next strategy that's in my mini bit. Remember, the behavior, calling out an answer, has worked in the past. And so when it doesn't work because we're refusing to respond, it's predictable that intensity of that behavior may increase. So a simple shouting out of an answer may get louder. And our goal is not to punish the child, but to get them to engage in metacognition, get them thinking about their behavior. And when they're yelling really loud and they realize, wow, she's not paying attention, then they're starting to think, well, why isn't she? Why isn't he responding to me? Well, I didn't raise my hand. Maybe I should raise my hand. That's not going to work all the time, but it's going to work enough. It's not even going to work most of the time, but it's going to work enough to justify its use. If we can get those kids engaged in metacognition, thinking about their behavior, and they alter their behavior, half our battle is done. Okay, but sometimes, being able to refuse to respond is not enough. So, giving the person the eye, you want to stop mid-sentence. So, there's a big difference between stopping it at the end of a sentence versus stopping in mid-sentence. Stopping mid-sentence disrupts flow and it kind of sets off a cue and they'll look up. And once that person looks up, make eye contact with them. Drop your head slightly and disengage pretty quickly. see if the student refocuses. So you want to stop mid-sentence, focus on that particular student, drop your head, and then move on. Hopefully you're practicing with that. Okay?